US is asking China to cut the trade surplus by $100 billion. That's on top of global tariffs on steel and aluminium. What will this latest demand do to relations between the two countries? And what's the mood in Moscow as the countdown to the elections begin? Will Vladimir Putin secure his fourth term as president? And the point team is, of course, on the ground in Moscow to cover the election. And I'm Chen Lei, sitting in for Liu Xin. The US is asking China to cut the trade surplus by $100 billion, and this comes after Trump's steel and aluminium tariffs that target its major traders. The Trump administration is also reportedly considering a clampdown on Chinese investments in the US and more tariffs. How will Beijing respond, and how will China-US trade tensions affect the rest of the world? Well, joining me for today's discussion in the studio are Mr. Liu Baocheng, Professor at the University of International Businesses and Economics, and Mr. Timothy Stratford, who is Managing Partner at Covington Burling. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Happy Friday, although the topic is somewhat serious. Tim, how did the administration come up with this magical $100 billion number, and does it matter?
I don't think they've given much of an explanation for that. Normally, when you have a formal trade case, like safeguards or anti-dumping, there's a calculation that shows the estimate of damages, and you come up with a number that way. In this case, it seems more of a political goal. The United States feels that if the trade deficit could be reduced by this amount, that it would be seen very positively. But I think we haven't heard any more detailed explanation than that.
Mr. Liu, isn't it ironic that they're asking for this reduction when, if China was a planned economy, it can achieve that? But of course, we are moving towards a market-based economy.
Absolutely right, because right now, actually, we were lectured to create the market economy and to conduct free trade by the U.S. And now, you know, we are getting more aggressive in our market force and getting more competitive. So this is the evolving trend of the entire global value chain, to which actually many U.S. companies, they voluntarily, given the attractiveness of the Chinese market, shift their production to China, and then, you know, they export back to the United States. So it's still, in a way, contributing to the U.S. income in certain ways. So therefore, right now, this is really a contradiction issue. So conducting plus that are actually, if there are more Chinese investments, you know, being allowed in the United States, that can substantially reduce the trade deficit. But right now, it seems that the Trump office doesn't really even welcome the humongous amount of Chinese investment over there.
Right. Mr. Stratford, a while ago you mentioned likening where we are right now in the China-US trade relationship to a dark tunnel. But you say nobody knows what the light is.
Right.
Would you like to shed light on that?
Sure. The U.S. and, frankly, a lot of China's other trading partners are not satisfied with the way the trade relationship is. There's a feeling that China's economic development model has evolved in ways that were not anticipated when China joined the WTO, and that therefore countries feel that the relationship is not very reciprocal or very balanced, and therefore they believe that there need to be some changes. The U.S. is not the only country that feels this way. The EU published a report in December, 467-page report detailing ways that they thought that China was not strictly a market economy and that the government intervened. In fact, China doesn't refer to its own market economy just as a market economy. It's a socialist market economy with Chinese characteristics. And those other words really mean something, and it means that the state is involved in directing the economy in ways that a pure market might not see. So what is the light at the end of the tunnel? The point is, if the U.S. imposes trade sanctions on China, if China retaliates, we can each demonstrate that we have the capability to harm one another. I think we can all agree that we do have that capability. But it doesn't solve anything in and of itself. So I think we need to look toward the light at the end of the tunnel, and the light would be understanding the differences in our economic systems and recognizing what adjustments we need to make so that our economic relationship can be fair and balanced and beneficial to both sides. And I don't see a lot of people defining very clearly yet what that light looks like.
But Mr. Liu, when I talk to US business lobby groups, US companies, they all mention they want reciprocity in investment, in market access. And, you know, this one thing that they're really not happy about is this market access for technology transfer requirement, which they feel is unfair. What do you think?
Well, from the Chinese government perspective, you know, this is really a free decision. So I'm running a shopping mall, so you want to have a vending operation here, so here's my term. And if you're attracted by the market, by the audience, you know, by the customers I attract, fine. So, but from the U.S. perspective, it's considered to be a duress, and U.S. companies are really being cornered. But again, China would argue that, okay, we have no booby trap, so we set the, you know, the transparent rule. So come here, do a joint venture, or no business. So please.
No.
Can I give an example?
Of course.
Okay. Let's take the automotive industry, for example. In order to sell cars in this market, you really have to build them here because there's a 25% tariff plus a 17% VAT. So you set up a joint venture. You're required to have a joint venture and to have at least 50% Chinese equity. Okay, so a number of the foreign automakers have done that, and they've been quite successful over the years. But now the government has said, in order to continue selling traditional cars with internal combustion engines, you also have to sell a certain percentage of new energy vehicles.
That's right.
And by next year, you have to be able to hit 20%. And the way that works is you get 2 points if it's an all-electric vehicle and 1 point if it's a hybrid. So let's suppose you're selling 4 million cars here. Now, all of a sudden, starting next year, you have to sell 200,000 all-electric vehicles, or you have to reduce your other sales and pay a penalty. Now, how are you going to do that? If you build them in the States and ship them over here, 25% tariff, 17% VAT won't work. So you have to set up a joint venture to build them here, and you have to transfer your latest and best technology. Otherwise, you have to stop selling some of the cars you were already selling here. So that's regarded as a kind of a compulsory pressure to transfer your best technology and build things in here rather than build them in your own country and ship them over. So the feeling is that's not trade, that's not free trade, and that's not what we anticipated when China joined the WTO.
So I'm sure, though, that these gripes against China's industrial policies were being discussed in some form or another at the now kind of stalled strategic and economic dialogue?
So
where's that at? Have we given up on that altogether?
Well, when the Trump administration began, they moved away from the strategic and economic dialogue and set up a comprehensive economic dialogue. They had the first meeting last summer, and it was halted rather abruptly. And the feeling on the U.S. side by the current administration was that the dialogue was not serious enough, that the U.S. has been in dialogue with China for 17 years since they joined the WTO.
I hear that a lot. We've been talking for so long, and we need to act.
Right, and so if we want to understand the Trump administration and understand where they're coming from, their view is that we've talked long enough and we need to see action, and therefore one can expect that they're going to take pretty strong action and they're going to do it very quickly, and then we're going to be in this dark tunnel that we talked about.
So, Mr. Liu, you know, China's Commerce Minister Zhongshan says China doesn't want and will not start a trade war, but is able to deal with any challenges. What does that mean?
Well, China has been a big beneficiary for the free trade world, particularly after joining the WTO, and after the 15 years of joining the WTO, you know, situation has changed. Even the value system has changed. As a matter of fact, when I was, you know, doing the trade in the 90s, you know, there was even direct subsidy for every dollar you earn. Back home, there was no strong protest, but now China, being the you know, the second largest economy and the first or second place of the world exporter, so now we receive the whole world attention, and so being free trade is no longer the ball of the game, but now the fair trade now is the game of rule. But the issue is, who is there to define fairness? So that's quite different. And seeing the situations of Mr. Zhongshan said, I think very correctly, that a trade war can only harm each other. You know, it won't really find the right solution, and plus that it is the, you know, the people, the constituency, who supported you to the office, who are really benefiting from such sort of China-U.S. trade. Actually, in the 90s, I was in the U.S. for 5 years, and the shoes, the suits, several $100s. But right now, made in China, $60. That is all. So a lot of lower-income houses really benefit a great deal, and not to mention that China-U.S. trade contribute nearly 3 million employments in the U.S.
Oh, I don't think anyone in the U.S. would disagree with that, but I think they have taken issue with some other aspects. But getting back to what China plans to do, China is promising a package of opening up reforms this year that are bigger than expected. This was announced in Davos. Do you think now that package will come out earlier than expected because of the tariffs threat?
It might, but again, we have to look at the underlying problem. The foreign companies that do business in China will certainly welcome China being more open to foreign investment and so on. I think, frankly, they're a little bit skeptical about what it will look like because they've heard promises before, but Liu He is saying that it will be impressive, and so I think people have a lot of respect for him. They'll be also concerned about whether, once they've invested here, will they always be treated the same as local companies, because often in their experience local companies get benefits for procurement and for subsidies and things like that. So they'll have that question. But finally,
perhaps only the state-owned ones.
But even if that happens, it doesn't solve the bigger problem, because in the United States, in Europe, and other countries, there's a feeling that China has overcapacity, that their industries are subsidized, and that therefore they have sold products below fair value that have eroded the employment base in the United States. And opening up China further for investment doesn't solve the problem that we have in our own countries because of some of China's practices. And so we have to think about both sides of the equation. We're not going to really address the political pressures that leaders face in the United States, in Europe, and in other countries.
Right, just we only have about a minute left, so one last question. If China and the US, let's think this through, trade less, would it be so dire for the global economy?
Well, I think this is going to be a disaster, what if trade war, happens between China and the United States being the second and first economy. So the 10 years of the turmoil over the financial crisis really gave a lot of hardship to the whole world, people. Now people really are seeing the light at the tunnel, so we should be responsible.
I don't think that would be good for anyone to see the trade flows reduced. I think we need to find ways to make the trade flows beneficial for both sides.
Okay, let's hope that continues, the dialogue and the trade flow. Thank you so much to our guests today, Mr. Liu Baocheng from the University of International Business and Economics, and Mr. Timothy Stratford, Managing Partner at Covington Burling. Okay, moving on now. We said we were going to cover the Russian election. We are going for a little break. Welcome back to The Point. I'm Cheng Lei, subbing in for Liu Xin. Well, the next few days are going to be very interesting in Russia because of the elections. And to cover the elections properly, we have sent a team over there. So we'll be bringing you exclusive interviews and panel discussions in the field. And for now, I'm going to toss things over to Liu Xin.
Many are predicting incumbent President Vladimir Putin to easily win the vote. However, others are arguing it is not a foregone conclusion. In case in the first round no candidate attains an absolute majority of the votes, a second round will take place 3 weeks later. What are the main issues concerning Russia? What are the chances that President Putin will win another 6 years in power? Meanwhile, there is heightened tension between Russia and the West over its alleged role in the poisoning of a former colonel of the Russian military intelligence service, Sergei Skripal. How likely is that to affect the election result, if at all? I'm Liu Xin. With me today in Moscow, Russia, is Professor Alexander Lukin, head of the Department of International Relations from the National Research University, Higher School of Economics in Moscow. Professor Lukin, thank you very much for accepting our interview. What are the domestic circumstances we're looking at when we're heading into this presidential election?
Well, domestic circumstances are pretty normal. The economic situation is quite stable, I would say. It's a little bit worse than it used to be when the oil prices were very high. And this is, of course, good for Russia because Russia is an exporter of oil and gas. So last 3-4 years, it's a little bit, we can say it's a little worse than it used to be before, but it's still pretty stable. We still had, last year had the GDP growth, a little growth. I think it's 1.5%. Of course, it's peanuts for China, but for Russia, it's not that bad, I would say. So, and the international situation is...
Politically, domestically, on the political front, how would you describe the atmosphere?
Well, I think it's stable, and people are so sure about the results of the elections that I don't think many people are even interested in that. Well, of course they'll go to vote. I'm quite sure that more than 50%, or like usually it's about 60 to 70% who go to vote, but there is no such kind of fierce campaigning on somebody's behalf, and there is no any kind of anxiety in the society.
So it's interesting you're saying it's almost for sure that President Putin will stay in power for the next 6 years. Why are you saying that?
Well, because all the opinion polls show that he's the most popular candidate, and they give them like give him 70 to 80% approval rating. When it comes to vote, of course, it would be counted in a different way. So it's not everyone would go to vote, but I think he'll still get like more than 60%.
But there are some people who are saying possibly the actual result might be less obvious as the prediction of a lot of people. Do you see it in that way? Do you think there is some kind of possibility that we might actually go into a second round?
Well, I don't think so, because other candidates are not as popular as him, and some of them are not very serious people, I think. So he is still seen by the majority of Russians as the natural leader. Maybe not everyone thinks that he is an ideal leader, but the majority surely think that there is no other option. But in Russia, the majority of the population, like in any big country, people are not that much interested in foreign policy. So I don't think that for the majority it would be a factor at all. People generally think about President Putin's foreign policy as that he stands for Russia's interests and that they can be proud for their country, but they don't go into detail, into much detail.
Some people say that President Putin's foreign policy, a rather hawkish foreign policy, has backfired on the domestic development or the kind of environment that Russia is enjoying for its domestic development. For instance, the international sanctions that was brought on to Russia after its actions in Crimea and eastern Ukraine. What do you think of this kind of prospect in the future?
Well, first, when you say hawkish, the people who are saying that are basically, from leaders of NATO countries, let's say. Because the main problem with them is that in the 1990s, they thought that Russia was going to surrender its interests to them, and that they can control it. And now when Russia became more and more independent in its foreign policy, they are not happy. So they think it's a disaster, and of course they don't blame themselves, they blame Russia. So we have some problems with them, as I said. But I think they're going to get used to it. They're used to China's independence, for example. But China, from the very beginning, was kind of different.
They're not used to China's independence. I think there's a growing unease also about China's independence.
They're more used to it. But Russia is a bit special case, because they thought they already has it in their hands at some time, especially early 1990s. And then they kind of lost it. And as I said, they cannot blame their own policy, because nobody blames themselves in politics. So they blame Russia for this and that. Like if you take this case of killing of this person, a British spy, by the way. He was a British spy for like 10 years in Russia. And he was working as a in the Russian security, but he worked for Britain actually. So, which is also a strange thing. Nobody says if it was proper to, you know, hire Russian security personnel by the British. But even this killing case, officially, even the British investigation has not finished, so we don't know the result. We don't know who killed him and why and for what reason. So, and they already proclaimed that it was Russia. So it's a bit strange.
Why do you think they're doing that? Are they choosing to do this at this particular moment to derail the election that might happen in Russia?
Well, it's not that simple, because they don't care about the elections because they know the results just like we know it in Russia, or they can predict it. But in general, I think it's for Britain is doing it for its internal reasons. As I said, they wanted the government in Britain now wants to show kind of to tell the public that the fact that they left the EU was correct, and they are moving in the US direction. So while Europe in general, like France or Germany, they're like more moderate towards Russia, and they would like to, in general, would like to ease the sanctions against Russia. But Britain is trying to be, you know, a good pupil of the United States, let's say. So they want to show. I was just, when I was coming here, I was listening to the debates in the British Parliament, and it was very strange because people were. It reminded me of the Soviet, Supreme Soviet a little bit, because people without any reason were saying that Russia did this and that, and because they're interested in that, I think. There is no real proof. The only proof they have that this substance that was used during the killings was supposedly produced in Russia, which also we don't have documents, we don't know if it's true or not. But even if it's true, it doesn't say anything. Not even in Russia. It was produced in the Soviet Union, or invented, created in the Soviet Union. But you know, Kalashnikov is also produced in Russia. So, but many people kill each other with Kalashnikov. It doesn't mean that the Russian government is to blame for that necessarily.
So this is a very interesting thing that I'm thinking as a result of this kind of heightened tension between Russia and the West. Now, after the collapse of the former Soviet Union, the Russia country adopted the Western political system with multi-party election, parliamentary system with the checks and balances of powers, and yet the West does not like Russia, right? They just don't like Russia, even if Russia has embraced the Western political system. Do you see something in there?
Well, you are saying the same thing that I said, more or less. By embracing political system, well, what is meant in the West by embracing political system, and that their political system, and that Russia should have a government, or any other country, that would be obedient to the West. And they managed to do it in East European countries, in some post-Soviet countries, in the Ukraine, but they could not do it in Russia because it's just too big. You know, in some countries like Russia and China are just too big to have a government which is obedient to anybody. So, and they don't know how to explain it. So they want to blame it on the Russian government. But I would tell them another thing, that the fact that that we have this kind of government is because of them, because of their inconsiderate policy in the 1990s, let's say, and earlier. So even from, let's say, democratic and opposition point of view in Russia, the West is to blame that they kind of helped the conservative people in Russia to become more popular.
They made an enemy out of the enemy.
No, because the opposition, the pro-Western forces, let's say, or pro-Western politicians in Russia, they have nothing to sell to the Russian public.
Looking ahead, though, what do you see are the biggest challenges facing President Putin once he's elected again?
Well, the main challenge would be the domestic economic situation, of course, because, of course, as I said, the situation is pretty stable. It's not enough for any kind of serious discontent at the moment, but still there's a problem of gradual stagnation of the economy. Of course, 1.5%, 2%, even 3% growth is enough for survival, but it's not enough for real speedy development. We need growth at least like in China now, at least 6, 7, 8% perhaps.
Do you think it is likely to happen anytime soon? By the way, President Putin outlined very ambitious goals, right, for Russia for the next decade. Do you think he is sure that he can achieve that? Are you, as a scholar, optimistic?
We should wait and see. When President Putin speaks, he always says very good things and very correct things, but not everything is fulfilled. Like he always says that, correctly says that we should free ourselves from the dependency on oil and gas exports, that we should fight corruption, that we should create better conditions for small and medium-sized business, but these problems are still there. So let's hope that he and his government, either new or the old one, are going to solve these problems in the next 6 years.
Professor Alexander Lukin, head of the Department for International Relations at the School of High Economics from the National Research University in Moscow. Thank you very much for accepting our interview.
Thank you.
We'll have a lot more coverage from Moscow for the Russian elections over the next few days. That's going to do it for this edition of The Point. You can download the app called CGTN to watch us on your mobiles, or go to YouTube to look for CGTN The Point. I'm Zheng Lei, subbing for Liu Xin. See you later.